Gleb, please go ahead. Thanks a lot. So welcome everybody to this new event and new activity in global bioimaging, which we call How to Talk to Your Funder. It's the first time we are now gathering under this title, and it's based on the discussion we had at the recent Expression of Experience conference in Montevideo, when, as you might remember, on the second day, the panel and the audience discussed quite intensely about long-term sustainability of our infrastructures, as well as of community networks. And related questions, for example, are how can we understand and demonstrate the impact and contribution of imaging and of our facilities to science and to society? This question is being dealt with by the existing Global Bioimaging Working Group on Impact. But there are also more questions. How can we best prepare for monitoring and assessment by our national funders? How can we build a solid plan for long-term sustainability of our infrastructures that then can be presented to the funders so that this plan also talks to the funder and the politicians? So in a nutshell, how can we learn their language and can also understand their language for ourselves to better achieve the goals that we really would like to achieve for the long-term sustainability of imaging platforms and imaging infrastructures? And I think that, and likely you all will agree with this, that in global bioimaging, we are a highly resourceful community, and we can use our common experience and knowledge here and share it also on this topic. So the idea is to start now a series of online meetings for a larger group of interested participants. So anyone who is interested can join in and listen in. And the first one is taking place here today. And we invite relevant speakers from academia as well as from public funders as much as possible. And I'm trying currently to engage with a public funder for the second edition of this meeting in springtime 2023. Then maybe after 3-4 editions of this more public event, building on the interests expressed by the participants, we can then launch a working group, which will look deeper into the topic and into the preparation of guidelines and recommendations on how to talk to the funder. And these guidelines can then be, as all the other international recommendations that we are working on, can then be broadly shared and published with the imaging communities and beyond. So additional activities beyond these meetings where we listen to a speaker and then have a longer discussion can evolve now based also on your input and your feedback. But now let's focus on today. Let me introduce to you our first speaker of this new series in global bioimaging. I think most of you already know him. It's KildareMiranda. Kildare is a cellular biophysicist specialized in the application of microscopy techniques for the study of parasitic microorganisms. He has authored over 100 papers and book chapters describing the functional role of parasitic structures, including the description of a novel organelle in Toxoplasma gondii. He is co-founder and vice director of the National Center for Structural Biology and Bioimaging of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and here he is also director of the Advanced Microscopy Unit. He's the former president of the Brazilian Society for Microscopy and Microanalysis and affiliated member of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences. He is the current president of the Inter-American Committee of the Societies for Microscopy. Today, Kildare will present their publication on mapping the Brazilian microscopy landscape, a bibliometric and network analysis, and also which impact this publication had. So I hand over to Kildare now, and please do not rush. We have time also afterwards for questions, because the main idea of this event is really to discuss together and to learn from each other. And I will also have some questions for the audience later on. Thanks a lot, and Kildare, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Antje, for the kind introduction. So first of all, I'd like to thank Antje and all the group from Global Bioimaging for the opportunity to be here and present some of what we did in the past years. And but before starting my presentation, just a quick disclaimer, as I did at the CCI meeting. I'm going to present some of the results, the experience that we had lobbying the government of Brazil to secure funding for science. But this was something done by dozens of people. I had very, very, very little contribution, if any, to any changes that we had in the system. So I'll just mix a little bit of what we did regarding bioimaging, or more specifically microscopy, and how funding is organized in Brazil, and how our scientific society here work to try to change things and secure funding for science. So start sharing my screen. Could you please let me know if you can see it?
Perfect.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I will talk about security and support from key stakeholders, lessons learned from in lobbying the government of Brazil. This is basically the same talk that I gave at the CCI meeting that we had earlier this year. I just put some, added some new information. So as Antje said, that we have a little bit more time now. So, so before talking about how we try to change the system here, we need to understand how the funding system works. Just before, just let me ask you something. Can you, is there anything up at my screen? Which, so now I can move it. Yeah, so something was just blocking my screen here.
It looks all fine from this end.
Okay, thank you. So, so before trying to change the system, we need to learn how the system works. Right? So this is something that in Brazil, as surprising that it might seem, not many people, I mean, scientists are not aware of how our funding system works. We just, most of the scientists are just waiting for opening of new grant applications. If they fit at the area, they submit proposals, but they don't know very well how these things are organized in the country. So I will talk specifically about one fund that is called FNDCT. So we, in Brazil, we have funding at the federal level. So it takes care of funding for the whole country, and also at the state level with research support funding agencies, which have their budget defined by specific laws at each state. So sometimes a percentage of tax collection, sometimes predefined in some cases, secures funding for science at states, but in most cases the funding has to go to this specific state. But at the federal level, one of the main supports that we have to fund science and technology comes from a fund called National Fund for Development of Science and Technology. This was a law that was created in '69 and modified in 2007. Including different sectors of the economy that benefit from the scientific activity. So, for instance, agribusiness, oil and gas. So different sectors are exportation, different sectors of the economy that benefit from science and technology. They have, by law, they have to apply a certain percentage of their profits in this fund, and then this is converted in support to different areas in science and technology. So it's very important to know the law. And why is that? Because although we have this law which secures funding for science and technology, the funding dynamics is highly affected by government decisions. They can just hold the money, they can retain the funding at the government. It's forbidden to use this funding to other purposes other than science and technology, but they can just keep the funding there, and this impacts a lot in our activity. So, for instance, this is the line here is a curve that shows the collection of the money for this fund. So, which is increasing a lot. And then we have the application of these funds in two types of funding. So refundable, so this means these allowances that you have for companies that technology-based companies that want to invest, so they have to pay less interest, so they invest in technology, they advance, and now they have they can reach a different public now. For instance, one of the main companies that makes knives and pens and all these things in Brazil, they got a huge improvement in their overall distribution along the world after initial investment coming from one of these agencies. And they are now everywhere in the world. They have international competitiveness. And so, and then what regards basic science is this part here, the gray part, non-refundable funds. So this is us. Universities, research centers. So this is, I don't have to pay back the microscope that I have installed here. So this is more or less what happens. And then, as you can see, this is very, very affected by government decisions. As we can see here, for instance, we had good years during the previous governments. It started to grow a lot during the first and second term of Lula. But the consequences came after his presidency, where we had a lot of investment. Sometimes they even invested more in science than they collected that year, because in the year before they didn't invest so much. And this is what happened in the last years after changing the government. So, for instance, it's not the problem of funding for science. It's not a problem, a money problem, because, for instance, they collected last year almost 10 billion, but they invested only in basic science, in non-refundable, only 10% of this amount. So this is a tragedy here in Brazil. And we were really, really in a bad situation regarding funding of science and technology. So we had to react to that. We had to do something. And this, and before all these things happened, we started a work that we think that is very important to try to change this the funding system. Instead of a government policy, which I mentioned that is very highly affected by their decisions, we want to implement a state policy, which is immune. Here we want to be immune to the government decisions. So independent of on the government that is there, we must secure funding for science. And one of the important steps is to have a critical diagnosis of each area of in which our countries working regarding science and technology development. So from our side, we did it for the microscope. At the time, I was at the Brazilian Microscopy Society and Brazilian Society for Microscopy and Microanalysis, and we developed a study that mapped the Brazilian microscopy landscape. I won't get into much detail in all results of this paper. You have here the reference, but I will just give you some examples. For instance, in Brazil, we have a large number of instruments. This is just electron microscopy. It was very hard to track the light microscopy infrastructure, but for electron microscopy, we have around 700 instruments. operating. But as you can see here, most of the investment is done in the south and southeast part of the country. So we have a very uneven distribution of instruments. So this immediately tells us that we need to invest more in the north part and Midwest part, northeast part of the country. And this has some historical reasons. So the most competitive institutions are at this region here, are located in the southeast and south of Brazil. And so this means that we have to have policies to try to strengthen these regions here. And this was one of the changes that we had in the law that I mentioned in 2007, that now for this funding, this FNDCT funds, 30% of everything that is funded must go to these areas. So this is a very active proposition of the government to try to develop these regions. And this reflects in the microscopy activity. Of course, if all the applications are evaluated based on the competitiveness of the groups, and if the best groups are in these regions, they got all the money. And then we have all these things happening again. So we have to create mechanisms to develop these regions. And one thing that we like that we saw from this study, and that we showed to the policymakers, is that our community reacts. So this is the investment in the solid line here, investments on microscopy along the years. And we see here after 2013 started to drop. But before, we had an increase here around 2010, and then we have this in 2013, and this is accompanied by an increase on the publications and number of articles published. So we react to investment. This is one thing. It's not an empty investment. We react, and you can imagine what will happen with the country if this curve continues dropping. So this is some things that our critical diagnosis can provide to the policymakers. And also different areas where Brazil is strong. For instance, we have a lot of publications, and we're very strong in soft materials, mainly dental materials, so odontology. But this is mostly just SEM images, not really advanced microscopy, but there's a lot of people. So this is important for the government, it's important for the companies to know that we need a lot of scanning electron microscopes along the country. So it's not really expensive, fancy machines, but we need it a lot. But then we have major fields in material science and biology, or structural biology and bioimaging, as you can see here in heat maps. So most of the publications, and so if we didn't exercise, we didn't publish it because it would create a lot of antibodies, let's say, against the work. But if we display the same graph here, but the size of the balls is related to impact factor, then this yellow part here just shrinks, right? So it doesn't mean that we don't need it. We have a lot of people there. They are doing different things with microscopy. So this is the kind of thing that we are discussing with the funding agencies. And as I mentioned before, so if we do a heat map here, we see that we have a lot of people working in material science, a lot of people doing structural biology and bioimaging, and we have this region here that needs more attention. So interface between these two areas, this is something that is still really poor in the country. And all these things we are giving feedback to the agencies, to the funding agencies. And so, but to try to create this state policy, we have to work closely with institutions that are either well recognized in the development of scientific activities, so it doesn't make any.
Can I see Chris' hand up. I don't know, Chris, if you want to ask a question directly now to one of the slides, or?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Kildare, that's okay for you?
Yeah, of course.
So
Go ahead.
yeah, about those word maps, those heat maps. Did you where did you extract the data from? Where did you get that information from? Did you do that from literature, or did you ask people to fill in a survey?
No, all literature. This is something that I forgot to mention. All literature, and this we only based our results on what is published, right? Just literature. And for instance, this was something that a feedback that we had from a group in Minas Gerais. They run a microscopy center there, and they have maybe, I don't know, 50% of their time is to dedicated to service to the companies. And this didn't show up in our analysis because they don't publish as much as other centers, although they have a very strong activity. So, but this is all based on publications.
Right. And what did you scan in the publications? The whole text, or keywords and abstract, or?
This was done by it was tricky because depending on the group that did it at Fiocruz, our colleagues here that are specialized in bibliometric studies, they said that depending on the type of keywords that we gave them, the output was too big. So they had to cut. I don't remember now, Chris, specifically in which things we had to be more specific because it was too broad, you know. But for instance, for the distribution of the instruments and or publications in the areas, we use these keywords that you saw in these keywords here were used.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, no problem. And so to work to try to create this state policy, we had to work with institutions that are well recognized in development of scientific activity. So we have to have an institution that represented us. So in this case, Brazilian Academy of Science and the Brazilian Society for the Progress on Science Progress, right? And also some institutions that benefit from scientific and technological development, and they have a very strong influence on the government. This is very important. For instance, we have the National Confederation of Industry. They have a lot of influence in the government. So if we convince them that it's important to invest in science, we have a very, very strong ally. And also, this was something that was created by the Brazilian Academy of Science and SBPC. They opened an office at the Congress level called Knowledge Observatorium to monitor the activities at the Congress level. So the idea here is to know before what they are scheming against us before the laws are passed, before the votes, and to try to lobby at the right time, and this is has proven to be very, very useful. Although they don't have any votes, but it's just knowing what is happening before bad things happen. And another thing is to create awareness. This is something that for some countries, more developed countries, this is this is obvious, but it's not for us here. Most of the officials at funding agencies, some institutes, the civil society, some of them, or most of them, don't know the impact that science has in our daily life. So we have to translate to them the importance of the scientific activity. In some cases, they don't speak English, or they don't read in English. So we translated that paper in a manual or in a report in Portuguese, so that we can give to the funding agencies and officials. And just one example of something that they had no idea. Brazil is a big country. As I mentioned, we have a lot of instruments concentrated in certain regions. And one thing that we saw from this study is that this is a map that shows the intensity of cooperation between different institutions. And what we saw is that the institutions that are closer, they collaborate more, they cooperate more. So this calls for an urgent investment in mobility, because we have most of the instruments concentrated in one side, and let's say people at the north, they are collaborating amongst themselves, and they don't have access to some advanced instruments that we only have at the southeast. So this is something that generated some policies to invest in mobility, so just pay for visits, travels, and this scientific exchange. In-person scientific exchange mechanism. So this is one of the things that we were working with them. And one thing is that depending on which person you are talking to, for instance, sometimes at the funding agencies or at these places, you deal with the scientist, which maybe it's not from the bioimaging area, it's not from microscopy side, but it's a scientist. So things like this shares a statement that resolution is clearly limited by the unavailability of necessary funds. This is something that is that has some appeal, and sometimes you can even express that this resolution is not only spatial, but time resolution, depth resolution, transcale resolution, sensitivity of the system. So you can elaborate, but sometimes you just have to give them concrete examples. You have to give them examples of things that they can relate to. And for instance, one of the things that I did is this slide from a presentation that I gave at the funding agency, the FINEP, one of our main funding agency here, just to the technicians and directors that organize the grant application. So this is just an example on how microscopy can be used to analyze formation of biofilm and medical devices. This is a capillary used to inject antibodies, which is full of Cryptococcus neoformans. So this is the kind of thing that they immediately understand why sometimes it's very hard to fight an infection, or if you have a hospital infection and this kind of thing. And one of the things that I always do, this was some data that I put, these figures that I put in our grant application, recent grant application for cryo-EM. So we just showed them that cryo-EM is used to study virus inactivation strategies in the case of COVID-19. So this is I won't get into much detail, but this is just how cryo-EM was used to evaluate the structural modifications at the S protein from prefusion to postfusion after treatment with beta-propiolactone, which is used to inactivate viruses for vaccines from inactivated viruses. And so this is something that they immediately can understand, although they don't understand the science, they understand that it's important. Or to strategies for vaccine production. In this case, it's AstraZeneca, it's Shadox, and how we can quantitatively evaluate the expression of the S protein, how these cells secrete how many prefusion and postfusion proteins. So this is a type of example. So try to find examples that they can understand, that they can relate to. I think that I never said this in the context of bioimaging. I think that the only time that I said that was during an interview in Montevideo together with Antje. But I have a personal experience with my son. Some of you know my baby. He was like 8 months old, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And everything's fine now after surgery. He's no neurological impairment. Everything's fine. It was benign. but all everything that we had before and after surgery depended on bioimaging techniques. So he did ultrasound, CT scans, MRI, very sophisticated and elaborate techniques. For instance, they analyzed the metabolites to learn in advance if the tumor was benign or not. Then after surgery, histopathology proved that the tumor was benign. So all this was done using bioimaging techniques and with a scientific approach, using the side of the brain that had no tumor as a control. So all these things you can mention and they can relate to. So this is something that I didn't mention, I never mentioned in the context of a grant application, because I think that is kind of emotional blackmail, but it's something that if you know stories and you can tell them, it's very, very important. So just an example in Rio, for instance, we showed one thing that we showed in these papers, that Rio de Janeiro have a very strong position in the country. And because of this problem that we had with the federal funding from the federal agency, we had to reach out to our state funding agency to try to get more funding. And one of the examples that we gave was from this one from the vaccines. And so we showed them that we have the need for high cost equipment in Rio de Janeiro, and this resulted in a big grant application for our standards. Was 100 million reais that supported different areas of research, not only microscopy, just supercomputer, linear accelerator, so different areas. And in this grant application, we were granted with funds to start a new cryo-EM platform here. So this is more or less what we do. We also had to reach out to politicians. So as I mentioned at the CZI meeting, one of our senators here is Romário, a former soccer player. And again, create awareness to the politicians, deal with the presidential veto. So this, we try to change the law. The idea was to pass a law that forbids the retainment of the funding from FNDCT, and we had to reach out to politicians to convince them to support and secure funding for basic science. And this is this was also aligned with the plan for the application of the funds. You don't. We need not only to secure funding for science, but we have to tell them where we intend to use it. And this was organized by the Brazilian Academy of Science that established funding policies for less developed regions, definition of strategic areas, science, basically showing that science is a tool to solve problems of the society. For instance, one of the things that I mentioned already is the necessity to invest in these regions that are less funded. And this is the kind of thing. So one thing that is that impact a lot in our microscope activity was something called, sorry, that is in Portuguese because this was a slide that was already done. So this is called SOS equipment. So if you have, this was something that came from the bank, from the lab. One of our colleagues just suggested to the funding agency at the time that we needed something SOS. So if you have an instrument that is broken, then you have to wait for 6 months until they have an open grant application. So with this program, if it's broken, you submit immediately. If you are successful, they provide the money immediately. And if you see here, in the first round, we had a total of 75 applications approved and 20 from microscopy activity. And in the end, This was, it's missing an 8 here, 38 million reais in 2022, around 7 million US dollars just to fix equipment. And this was something that came from the scientific community. So what happened in the end is that a new law was established, it passed. The only vote in the Senate against this law was from the son of our current president, which is also a senator, but it was a single vote, and then retainment of science and technology fund is forbidden. So the application foreseen for 2022 was to around 9 billion reais. So to have it back. So election years, I'm sure that you had the opportunity to see a lot of problems that we had here. But the main message here is that in Brazil we have something called fiscal responsibility law, which means that if they don't do it, if they don't apply, they are non-eligible. And there's nothing worse for a politician. They are not afraid of jail. They are afraid of becoming ineligible. And this is something that was, we didn't have all this funding applied in 2022, but we had a lot of grant applications approved, and we are on the way to release this, to have these funds released. And so with that, just a song that was a bit popular here a few years back. So it's just to show them that it's not really about the money, right? We just have to show them that we need to change things. We need to change the society. We don't need to. We are not really. We need money to do things. We don't need money for ourselves. So with that, I'd just like to thank Vanderlei de Souza that gave me some of these slides, and Ricardo Rosa and Caio Xavier from FINEP that also shared some information with me, and Priscilla and Bruno with the bibliometric work. And with that, I thank you once again, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much, Kildare. And I will take this quote to the next meeting this afternoon, where it's exactly about this topic, having far too little funding for far too ambitious ideas. Yeah, thanks a lot. Maybe we can stop the recording now and move over to the